The lawyer's office smelled like new carpet and old coffee, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should have worn different shoes. "The house was always going to be mine," Denise said. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. Not cruel. Not even loud. Just certain, in the particular way our sister had always been certain about things that weren't hers yet. I didn't answer her. I just smiled. "My name is Claire, I'm 47, and 3 weeks before that moment, I didn't know any of this was coming." I should back up. I coordinate scheduling at a family medicine clinic in Millbrook, Ohio, a job I've had for 19 years, the kind of job you take because it lets you leave at 4:30 and be home by 4:45. I've lived in the house on Larch Street, the house Denise was talking about, since I was 6 years old. It has a porch that my father built the summer before he died, uneven in the middle where the wood settled wrong, and I have swept that porch more times than I could count and never once minded, because sweeping a porch is a thing you can do with your hands while your mind is somewhere else entirely. My mother, Margaret, is 79. She has been living with dementia for the better part of 6 years, though if you asked me when it actually started, I'd tell you honestly I'm not sure. There wasn't a single day. There was a slow erosion, the way a riverbank gives way not all at once but handful by handful, until one day you look up and the shape of the land has changed and you can't remember exactly when. I have been the one taking care of her for 22 years. Not just the dementia years, all of it, since my father's heart gave out in the garage on a Tuesday morning when I was 25 and Denise was 29 and already 300 miles away in Columbus, already married to Mark, already building a life that didn't have room in it for a mother who needed her blood pressure checked twice a day. I don't say that with bitterness. I want to be honest about that, because bitterness distorts a story, and this one doesn't need distorting. I chose to stay. Nobody made me. I told myself, back then, that I was simply the one who could. I had no husband yet, no children yet, a job flexible enough to bend around doctor's appointments. It made sense. It kept making sense for so long that I stopped noticing it had become the entire architecture of my life. Denise visited 4 times a year. Christmas, Mother's Day, my mother's birthday in August, and one other weekend she'd schedule and then sometimes cancel. She called more often than she visited, quick calls, 10 minutes, always ending with "I have to run, Mark needs the car or Tyler has practice." Tyler is her son, my nephew, 15 now, a quiet, watchful kid who used to fall asleep in my lap when he was small and who I hadn't had a real conversation with in over a year. I'm telling you all of this so you understand what I understood, going into that ordinary Tuesday in March, that my life had a shape, and the shape was familiar. And the shape had never once included the idea that my sister was keeping a secret with a signature on it. The morning it started, I was standing in my mother's kitchen, our kitchen, I should say, though I'd started thinking of it as mine somewhere around year 15, pouring her morning pills into the little plastic organizer with the days of the week printed on it in fading letters. The light came through the window over the sink at that particular slant it takes in early spring, gold and thin, catching the dust I never quite managed to wipe away from the top of the cabinets. My mother was at the table, humming something with no shape to it, turning a spoon over and over in her hands like she was trying to remember what it was for. "Denise called," she said, out of nowhere, in the flat, pleased voice she used when something had made her happy and she wanted me to know it. "She's coming to see the house." "She was just here for Christmas, Mom." "No," my mother said, with the sudden, brittle certainty that always meant she was somewhere else in her mind, some room I couldn't follow her into. "She's coming to see her house." I remember laughing, a small, tired laugh, the kind you give when you've decided a thing isn't worth examining. "Her house," I said. "Sure, Mom." I didn't ask what she meant. That's the first thing I'd tell you now. If I could sit across from you the way I'm sitting across from you in my mind as I tell this, I didn't ask. Not because the question didn't occur to me. It did, for half a second, the way a shadow crosses a wall and you register it without turning to look. I let it go because dementia says 100 things a day that don't mean anything, that are just tangled wires crossing where they shouldn't, and I had learned, over 6 years, which wires to trace and which ones to leave alone. I was wrong about which one this was. I just didn't know it yet. I finished the pills. I kissed the top of her head, the way I did every morning, and I noticed, the way you notice things without noticing you're noticing them, that her hair smelled different. Not bad. Just different. Like a shampoo that wasn't the one I bought her. I didn't think about that either. Not that day. I went to work. I came home at 4:45. And the porch light was on, though I was certain I'd left it off, and there was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize, small and silver and gone by the time I pulled in behind it, tail lights disappearing around the corner of Larch Street before I could see the plate. My mother was at the table when I came in, still holding the spoon. Who was here? I asked her. She looked at me like I'd asked her something in a language she used to know. Nobody, she said. Nobody was here. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, keys still in my hand, feeling something I couldn't yet name settle into the room like a smell that hadn't been there an hour before. There's a rhythm to caregiving that outsiders never see, and I want to describe it honestly, because it matters to what comes next. 6:30, medication and breakfast. 8, I leave for work, and Yvonne, the home aide I pay out of pocket 3 days a week, arrives to sit with my mother, do light housekeeping, take her for a slow walk around the block if the weather allows. 4:45, I'm home. Dinner, evening pills, the news on low in the background because my mother likes the sound of voices even when she can't follow what they're saying. 9 o'clock, I help her to bed. Some nights she knows exactly who I am. Some nights she calls me by my aunt's name, a woman who died in 1994, and I answer to it because correcting her only frightens her, and frightening her serves no one. This was the water I swam in. I want you to understand that I loved my mother, I still do, and that the love and the exhaustion lived in the same body without much conflict between them, the way two tenants can share a house without ever really speaking. I had built an identity, slowly, invisibly, around being the daughter who stayed. I didn't examine that identity very often. When you're the one who's needed, you don't tend to ask yourself whether being needed and being loved are actually the same thing. I hadn't asked myself that question in years. I wouldn't have known where to start. The week after the silver car in the driveway, small things kept not adding up, the way a column of numbers doesn't add up and you assume, at first, that you've simply made an arithmetic mistake. My mother mentioned, twice, an appointment I hadn't scheduled. The man from the office, she called him. When I pressed it gently, the way you press on a bruise to see how much it hurts, she couldn't tell me who, or when, or why. I chalked it up to a dream, or a nurse's visit she'd folded into some other memory. I had a file cabinet in my head for things like that. I put it in the drawer and closed it. Sarah called on Thursday. Sarah and I had been friends since the 3rd grade, the kind of friendship that survives without much maintenance because it was built early enough to be load-bearing. She worked as a legal assistant and notary at Hooper & Vance, the only law firm in Millbrook big enough to have its name on a building. We'd had dinner every few weeks for over a decade. She'd been at my father's funeral. She'd been at my mother's 75th birthday. She had, in some sense, grown up in that house on Larch Street almost as much as I had. Hey, she said, and there was something in the way she said it, a half-beat too bright, that I noticed and then talked myself out of noticing. Just checking in. How's your mom? Same as always. Why? No reason. Just thinking about her. A pause, longer than the question warranted. You guys are good? Everything's normal? Sarah, you're being weird. She laughed, too quickly. I'm not being weird. I have to run, actually, client call. Love you. Tell your mom I said hi. I stood there afterward, phone still warm against my ear, and felt the specific, low-grade unease of a conversation that had said nothing and yet clearly hadn't been about nothing. I didn't ask her what she meant. I told myself I was too tired to chase down a feeling with no shape to it. Looking back now, I understand that Sarah's call wasn't a check-in at all. It was her trying, in the only way she could let herself, to warn me, and getting no further than she could bear. I want to pause here for a second, because I think some of you already know this feeling. The one where a friend calls you and something underneath the words doesn't match the words themselves, and you let it go, because chasing it feels paranoid, feels unfair to a person who has never given you a reason to doubt them. You'll understand, later in this story, why I wish I'd chased it. That same week, I found a business card in the pocket of my mother's cardigan while doing laundry. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering, Preston Kavanaugh, Elder Law and Estate Planning, an address in Columbus, not Millbrook. I turned it over twice, looking for a note, a date, anything. There was nothing on the back. I asked my mother about it that evening, holding it up like evidence in a trial neither of us knew we were having. I don't know what that is, she said, and I believed her, because with her, not knowing was usually the truth. Something tightened behind my ribs when I looked at that card, small and specific, like a key turning half a click in a lock that wasn't mine. I didn't know yet what it opened. I put it in the kitchen drawer with the batteries and the rubber bands and told myself I'd ask Denise about it the next time she called. She called that Sunday. I asked her, casually, if she knew anything about an elder law attorney in Columbus. There was a pause. I remember it precisely, because it was longer than a pause should be for an innocent question. Then, oh, that's probably just something Mom picked up at a senior center flyer or something. You know how she collects things now. It was a reasonable answer. It fit the shape of the world I lived in, where my mother's pockets accumulated strange, meaningless artifacts the way a tide pool accumulates shells. I let it fit. I filed it in the same drawer as the silver car and Sarah's strange phone call, and I went back to my life, because my life had appointments to keep and pills to count and a porch that needed sweeping, and I did not yet have any reason strong enough to stop and look directly at what was assembling itself, piece by piece, just outside the edge of what I was willing to see. That night I lay awake longer than usual, my chest tight in a way I couldn't place to any single cause, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the dark, and I thought, something is happening that I am not part of. I didn't yet know how right I was. She told me, much later, what had been going through her mind that spring, a conversation we never would have had if everything hadn't already burned down first. I remember exactly how it felt, sitting across from that lawyer, Preston, in his office with the good chairs. He asked me if I was sure. I told him I was sure. I told myself the house was owed to me, that I'd been the one who got sent away for college, who had to build a whole life somewhere else while Claire got to just stay, get praised for staying, get loved for staying, while I was the one who actually had to work for everything I had. Nobody ever thanked me for surviving on my own. I thought, if I don't do this now, while Mom still has good days, someone else will decide everything for me, Claire will decide everything, the way she decides everything, and I will end up with nothing again, the way I always end up with nothing. I told myself it wasn't stealing. I told myself it was finally being seen. I didn't let myself think about what it would cost her. Not yet. I was very good, that spring, at not thinking about that. By April, the unease had stopped being a feeling I could file away and started being something I carried into rooms with me. My mother's confusion had a particular flavor lately, one I hadn't catalogued before in 6 years of learning her disease's many moods. She'd bring up the papers, sometimes with excitement, sometimes with a vague, floating anxiety, like a word on the tip of her tongue she could never quite retrieve. Did I sign the papers? She asked me one Tuesday, apropos of nothing, while I was helping her into her cardigan. Denise said I needed to sign the papers. What papers, Mom? For the house. She looked at me, and for one unbearable second there was total clarity in her eyes, the kind that used to appear and vanish like sun through fast clouds. She said it would help me. I wanted to help her. I remember standing very still, one arm still inside the cardigan sleeve, feeling something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. I called Denise that night. I tried to keep my voice light, the way you try to keep your hands steady when you're afraid of what you'll do with them if you don't. Mom keeps talking about papers she signed. For the house. Do you know anything about that? Claire. Denise's voice had an edge of exhausted patience, the tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. She has dementia. She says all kinds of things. Yesterday she told Mark she used to be a ballerina. This felt different. Everything with Mom feels different to you because you're with her every day. You're too close to see what's actually just the disease talking. A beat. I love that you're so devoted to her, I really do. But you can't build a case out of things a woman with dementia says. It was a good answer. It was, I'll admit even now, not an unreasonable thing to say, and that was the trouble with it. Denise had always been skilled at handing me an explanation just solid enough to stand on, right up until the moment the ground gave way beneath it. I want to stop here for a second. Because if you've ever been the one everyone trusts to notice things, the one who manages the medications and the doctors and the small daily catastrophes, and then had someone tell you, gently, kindly, that this time you're the one not seeing clearly, you know exactly how that call felt. You start to doubt the only instrument you have left, which is yourself. I didn't call Preston Kavanaugh's office. I want to be honest about that, because this is the part of the story where I have to own my own mistake, not just Denise's. I had the business card. I had the phone number right there in the kitchen drawer with the batteries. And I didn't call, because calling meant believing something I didn't yet want to believe, and because some old, stubborn part of me still needed to be the one who held things together without anyone else's help, needed it so much that asking a stranger to explain what was happening in my own mother's life felt, absurdly, like admitting failure. That was the mistake that cost me the most time. Not trusting Denise too much. I'd never fully trusted her, not since we were girls, and she used to take the good half of anything we split and call it fair because she was older. The mistake was trusting my own need to handle everything alone more than I trusted the plain, cold fact sitting in a kitchen drawer. Sarah came for dinner at the end of April, the first time in almost 2 months, and I noticed things about her I wouldn't have noticed a month earlier. She didn't quite meet my eyes when she asked about my mother. She checked her phone twice during a conversation she would normally have given her full attention to. When I mentioned, lightly, that Denise had been asking a lot of questions about Mom's finances lately, Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth for just a beat too long before she set it down and changed the subject to Tyler's basketball season. I know some of you already see where this is going. I didn't. Not yet. I was still telling myself that the people I loved most in the world didn't lie to me, because believing otherwise would have meant rebuilding the entire foundation my life stood on, and I wasn't ready to start knocking down walls I'd lived inside for 22 years. I lay awake that night with my heart doing something irregular and fast against my ribs, the ceiling fan ticking its slow rotation above me, and I thought about the business card, and the silver car, and Sarah's fork stopping in midair, and I understood, not with words yet, just with a low animal certainty in my body, that something was being built around my mother without me in the room. I didn't sleep more than 3 hours. I made coffee at 5 a.m. and stood at the window watching the sky go from black to gray, my hands wrapped so tight around the mug that my knuckles ached, and I thought, tomorrow, I will call. I didn't call tomorrow either. It took me another 11 days. What finally moved me wasn't courage. It was paperwork. Mom's Medicaid renewal was due, and I needed a certified copy of her power of attorney for the file, the one naming me as her agent, drawn up 9 years earlier when her first diagnosis came in and we'd sat together at the kitchen table filling out forms neither of us fully understood. I called the county recorder's office to request the copy, gave my mother's full name and date of birth, and the clerk on the phone said something that made me sit down hard in my desk chair at work, the receiver pressed so tight against my ear it left a mark. I'm showing an amended document filed last September. A first codicil to the existing estate plan. Would you like that copy too? Yes. Yes, please send both. I don't remember driving home that day. I remember the envelope arriving 4 days later, and I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the the same table where my mother had once told me Denise needed her to sign something, reading it twice before the words settled into meaning. The codicil named Denise as sole beneficiary of the house on Larch Street. Not split evenly, as the original will had specified for over a decade. Sole beneficiary. Dated the previous September. I checked the date against my mother's medical file, which I kept in a folder in the hall closet because I was the one who took her to every appointment, who sat in every waiting room, who signed every form. Her neurologist's notes from that same September read, in the flat clinical language doctors use when they're documenting something they know will matter later. Patient exhibits significant impairment in executive function and short-term memory consistent with moderate-stage dementia. Patient unable to reliably recall recent events or demonstrate understanding of complex financial concepts during evaluation. Same month. Same disease already documented, in writing, by the doctor I had personally driven her to see. At the bottom of the codicil, under the notary seal, was a signature I knew as well as my own. Sarah Delaney. I remember the sound the paper made when I set it down on the table, a small, dry, almost nothing. I remember thinking, absurdly, that it should have made a louder sound, given what it had just done to the shape of my life. I didn't confront anyone that night. I want to explain why, because I think it matters. I sat with that codicil for 3 hours, reading it over and over under the kitchen light, and some cold, careful part of me, a part one didn't know I had until that exact moment, told me that if I called Denise right then, in the heat of it, I would say something I couldn't take back, and she would have time to prepare a story before I ever had proof strong enough to hold her to account. I made a photocopy. I put the originals back in the folder in the hall closet, exactly where they'd been, and I said nothing to anyone. I told myself I was being strategic. Some part of me also knows now that I was afraid that if I said the words out loud, I would have to actually believe them, and believing them meant admitting that the sister I'd spent my whole life making excuses for had watched me change our mother's diapers for 6 years while quietly arranging to take the one thing that mattered. 2 weeks later, at a birthday dinner for Tyler that I'd driven 3 hours to attend, my nephew, 15, gangly, still sweet in the unguarded way boys are before the world teaches them not to be, mentioned, completely without malice, that his mom had already started picking out paint colors for the living room at Grandma's. The table went quiet for exactly 1 second before Denise laughed it off. "He means for when we visit more, sweetie, don't listen to him," and moved the conversation along so smoothly that if I hadn't been carrying a photocopy of a codicil in my glove compartment, I might have believed her too. I know some of you already recognize this moment, the child who says the one true thing everyone else has agreed not to say out loud. Tyler had no idea what he'd just confirmed. I did. If you've ever had to sit at a table and smile while something inside you quietly, permanently rearranged itself, you know exactly what that dinner felt like. That night, alone in a hotel room 3 hours from home, I lay on top of the covers with the lights off and my heart going too fast, my hands cold even under the blanket, and I made a decision. I would not call Denise. I would not call Sarah. I would take everything I had to Preston Kavanaugh's office myself, alone, and I would find out exactly what my mother had, and hadn't, understood, the day she signed a document that erased 22 years of my life from the only inheritance that had ever mattered. I didn't know it then, but Denise had almost told Mark everything that same week. We were in the kitchen, late, after Tyler's party, and he asked me, offhand, nothing suspicious in it, how the estate stuff with Mom was going. I opened my mouth to tell him. All of it. The lawyer, the codicil, Sarah, the timing I'd chosen on purpose because I knew what the doctor's notes said. I got as far as "there's something I should tell you about the house," and then I looked at his face, so open, so ready to still think well of me, and I couldn't do it. I told him it was just paperwork, boring stuff, and I watched something in his shoulders relax, and I hated myself a little, and I did it anyway. It felt like the last quiet moment before something I'd built very carefully was going to fall down around me, and I wasn't ready. I don't know if I was ever going to be ready. The reading was Denise's idea. 2 months after my mother passed, quietly, in her sleep, in the room where I had cared for her for 6 years, my hand in hers, Denise called a meeting at Preston Kavanagh's office to finalize things properly, as a family. I already knew what she thought that meeting would be. I'd seen the way she'd talked to me at the funeral, gentle, almost pitying, the tone of someone preparing to deliver news she assumed would be a blow. She had arranged the room, in her mind, long before we walked into it, the sympathetic lawyer, the two of us on opposite sides of a conference table, herself explaining patiently that the house was legally hers, that she was sorry, that this was simply how Mom had wanted it. She expected tears, or an argument. She was ready for either. She was not ready for what I actually brought. The office smelled like new carpet and old coffee. Denise sat across from me in a blazer I recognized from Christmas, Mark beside her looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, Sarah, invited by Denise, not by me, sitting slightly apart near the window, and Tyler, who Denise had brought because he should understand how these things work, in a chair by the door, phone forgotten in his lap. The house was always going to be mine, Denise said, before Preston had even finished his opening remarks, and she said it with a small, kind smile, the smile of someone delivering hard news gently. I know that's not what you want to hear, Claire. But Mom made her wishes clear. I didn't answer her. I just smiled. My chest was tight, my hands cold in my lap, the way they'd been cold in that hotel room weeks before. I had rehearsed this moment so many times that my body knew it before my mind caught up. I reached into my bag and set 2 folders on the table, side by side, and slid them toward Preston without a word. The first held the neurologist's evaluation from September, dated and signed. The second held the codicil, with Sarah's notary seal at the bottom, dated the same month. The room did the work I didn't have to do. Preston read for a long moment, his face changing in the particular way a lawyer's face changes when he realizes the ground under a case has just shifted. This is the same month as this evaluation, he said, mostly to himself, tapping the pages. This raises a significant capacity question. Denise didn't flinch. That was the part that unsettled everyone else in the room more than anything I'd said. I don't know what you're implying, she said, calm, composed, her voice not rising a single degree. Mom knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to make things right for me, finally, after everything I've sacrificed being so far away. She was diagnosed with moderate-stage dementia that same month, I said quietly. Her doctor documented that she couldn't reliably understand complex financial decisions. I have the notes. I have the date. I have your friend's signature. I looked at Sarah when I said it. She looked back at me and said nothing at all, not a denial, not an apology, just a long, unbearable silence that told me everything her mouth wouldn't. This is absurd, Denise said, still calm, still smiling that same small smile, though something behind her eyes had gone very still. You've always resented that Mom and I were close. This is you trying to punish me for something that isn't even real. I didn't argue with her. I didn't raise my voice. I sat very still, the way I'd promised myself I would, and let the papers speak for me, and something in me understood, watching her deny it so completely and so calmly, that she would never once admit what she'd done, not today, not ever, not even to herself. Mark spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. Denise. Just her name, quiet, careful. The dates. Denise, look at the dates. Don't, she said, sharper now, the first crack in the composure, aimed at her own husband rather than at me. Don't you dare take her side. I'm not taking anyone's side. Mark's voice stayed low, but it didn't back down. I'm looking at the paper in front of me. Tyler, from his chair by the door, said nothing for a long moment, and then, in the small, honest voice of a 15-year-old who has just realized an adult he loves has been lying, said, Mom, you told me the paint colors were already picked out. You said it before Grandma even got sick. The room went completely silent. Denise's face didn't change, that was the thing I would remember most, long after, it stayed composed, pleasant, unbothered, as though her own son hadn't just said the truest thing anyone had said all afternoon. We'll discuss this as a family, she said finally, standing, smoothing the front of her blazer. This meeting is over. She walked out with her chin level and her shoulders straight, and I understood, watching the door close behind her, that I had not broken her. I had simply removed the one thing she'd been standing on, and she had found, immediately, somewhere else to stand. She never told me what she was thinking in that room. She didn't need to. I understood it anyway, the moment I saw her face, the particular stillness of someone who has decided, long before walking through the door, that no evidence in the world will ever be enough to make her say the words out loud. Preston filed a formal challenge to the codicil within the week. It took 4 months, an independent capacity evaluation of records, a deposition from the neurologist, and Sarah's own quiet, reluctant testimony, given, in the end, under oath, in a manner that could no longer be avoided, before the court invalidated the amended document entirely on the grounds of lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. The house reverted to the original will. Split evenly, as my mother had intended for over a decade before anyone convinced her otherwise. Denise's name came off the deed the same week her marriage, already strained by everything that had surfaced, began to fully unravel. Mark moved out that spring, and though I never asked him directly why, I understood enough from the way he still called sometimes, quietly, to check on me and on Tyler, that the truth had cost him more than just a house. Denise lost her legal claim. She lost her son's easy trust. Tyler, 16 now, spends most of his school breaks with me, and we talk more honestly than his mother and I ever have. She lost, most of all, the version of herself she'd been telling everyone, including herself, for over a decade, the devoted, wronged daughter, finally getting what she was owed. That story doesn't survive a courtroom. It didn't survive Tyler's voice in that office, either. Sarah lost her notary license. She lost my friendship, permanently, though not without a final conversation I hadn't expected. She called me 3 weeks after the ruling, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Denise told me it was already handled with your mom's lawyer, she said. That she just needed a formality witnessed. I told myself I believed her because I didn't want to know I didn't. A long pause. I'm not calling to ask you to forgive me. I know I don't get to ask for that. I just needed you to know I know exactly what I did. I didn't forgive her that day. I'm not sure I ever fully will. But I believed, finally, that she meant it, and that was its own kind of ending. Denise called too, once, months later, unprompted, in a voice I'd never heard her use before, not defending herself, not explaining, just talking, the way you talk when you finally have nothing left to protect. I spent my whole life watching you be the good one, she said. The one who stayed, the one everyone thanked, the one Mom looked at like she'd done something right raising you. I moved away and built a whole life and it never counted for anything with her, not the way staying counted for you. I told myself the house was the one thing that could finally prove I mattered as much as you did. I know that's not an excuse. I'm not calling to excuse it. I just wanted you to know that it was never really about the house. It was about 20 years of feeling like the daughter nobody would have missed. She didn't apologize. Not once, not in those exact words. But for the first time in my life, I heard something true underneath her voice, and I let myself hear it without needing her to be sorry for it to matter. I sold my half of the house the following spring. It felt right, in the end, not to keep living inside the walls where all of this had happened, the porch my father built, the kitchen table where my mother once told me Denise needed her to sign something, the drawer where a business card had sat for 2 weeks before I let myself understand what it meant. I bought a smaller place across town, with a yard too small for a garden and a kitchen too small for anything but the two of us, me and the quiet, and finally, some room to simply exist as myself, rather than as the daughter who stayed. I think about my mother often. Not the version at the end, confused and drifting, but the version from before, the one who used to sit at that same kitchen table and tell me, when I was young, that family was the one thing you could always count on. I don't think she was wrong, exactly. I just think she never imagined how much work it would take, at the very end, to make that true. There's a particular kind of realization that doesn't arrive all at once, it arrives in pieces, over months, the way I finally came to understand that I hadn't just been fighting for a house. I'd been fighting for the plain, simple fact that 22 years of showing up have to mean something, even when no one is there to witness them but you. Denise's undoing wasn't really the codicil, and it wasn't really Sarah's signature. It was the moment a 15-year-old boy said the one true thing everyone around that table had quietly agreed not to say, and his mother's face didn't move at all, because somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself so completely of her own version of events that even her son's honesty couldn't reach her. That's the part of this story that stays with me longest, not the betrayal itself, but how ordinary it looked while it was happening. Denise never once seemed like a villain across from me at that table. She seemed like a woman who had spent 20 years quietly rewriting her own history until she believed it, and I understood, finally, that the most dangerous lies are never the ones told to other people. They're the ones we manage to tell ourselves so well we forget we told them at all. What hurts most, if I'm honest, isn't the house. It's Sarah's silence in that room, a silence I'd trusted for almost 40 years to always land on my side. I've thought a lot about why she went along with it, and I don't think it was malice. I think it was easier for her to believe Denise's version than to risk the friendship by asking one hard question. That's a quieter kind of betrayal than Denise's, and somehow it stayed with me longer. Maybe you already know how this part ends. Most of us do. By the time we're finally willing to look, the moment always comes back to the same simple question: was I protecting the relationship, or was I just protecting myself from finding out it was never what I thought it was? If this story stirred up someone in your own life, a person who let you down, a red flag you talked yourself out of seeing, I'd love for you to share just one word about it in the comments. And thank you, truly, for staying with me through this one. It wasn't an easy one to tell.